Wow. So you guys really, really like Tenchi Muyo. And if there's one thing I've heard time and again from y'all is that you want to hear more about me talking about the series. And as such, we're going to do just that. But when it comes to the massive sprawling universe that is Tenchi, there's a lot to choose from. So to make it easier for me, I decided to talk about the one part of the series that I do know the best. Heck, I even rewatched the entire series for this video. So, without further ado, let's talk about Tenchi Universe. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am your ever-friendly Pokeprof, and welcome back to Fascinating Fiction. So let's start things off straight, shall we? As you all might remember from the last time we talked about Tenchi, I went into detail about how the different variations of the show existed, often comparing those shows to the original OVA. Universe is the first of these series, being made specifically for television, and as such, it's shaped a bit more like your traditional anime from the 90s, having a loose story that's told over its 26-episode run, instead of having a full story over 6-episode bursts like the OVA. You'll understand why I say loose story here in just a minute. With this new format, though, came a new director, and this is something I actually didn't know before and wouldn't have known had it actually not been for a rather aggressive commenter on my last video. You see, while I still hold true to the fact that Masaki Kajishima is the original creator of the Tenchi franchise as a whole, the director of the initial OVA of the series, Hiroki Hayashi, helped develop a large part of that original universe. I honestly didn't mention him because he left the series after that OVA, pretty much allowing Kajishima to do whatever he wished, which is what the aggressive commenter had a problem with, among other things. It was as I was doing more research into this, though, that I discovered that the different Tenchi continuities are actually separated mostly by the main creative source behind it. For example, we've got what's considered to be the Hasegawa universe, named after the scriptwriter from the first OVA, who went on to write a series of spin-off novels based within Tenchi. In the case of Tenchi Universe here, we've got Hiroshi Nagaishi as the main creative force and director behind the series. So any of the major changes could be attributed to him. So if you're watching the series and wondering why Washu is the one chained up in the Masaki Shrine, or why she's not a goddess of this universe, that would explain it. Getting into the actual series itself, though, the first thing that I've got to mention is that, well, its age and budget kind of shows. The animation could be a little stiff at times, with characters either just sliding into view of the screen when needed, or letting all the animation focus on a single ball of light that comes from an attack. Just a lot of stuff like that. It was pretty normal for the time, especially for something that had a TV budget, which this show did. I think the thing that surprised me the most in rewatching the series was actually the flashing lights issue, something I didn't remember at all as being a thing, but it also makes sense considering this series is before the era of the Porygon episode. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, one of the biggest blemishes in Pokemon history was an anime episode starring Porygon that caused seizures in a lot of children watching it, all thanks to a series of flashing red and blue lights. This actually changed the entirety of Japanese animation, where not only such a technique was greatly limited in the future, but some animes would go and actually have a notice at the beginning of the episode, or the characters themselves come up and ask the audience to remember to sit far away from the TV and do so in a brightly lit room.
Kurumi, please inform everyone to watch the show in a brightly lit room and to not sit too close to the...
You quit telling me what to do!
No.
Hell, even some shows today, like My Hero Academia, will darken some scenes of the fight to ensure this doesn't happen again. Tenchi, being from the before times, doesn't have this, and there were times where I actually had to look away from the screen because of the flashing lights of one of Washu's devices or an electrical attack. Its story, though, is the thing that I'm really interested in, and when you get down to it, you can actually split Tenchi Universe into 3 distinct arcs. The Gathering arc, the Multi-Universe arc, and the Jirai arc. And before anybody corrects me on what these arcs are actually called, these are my own names for them because I felt like they were a little bit more thematic than what I saw them actually being called. The Gathering arc is pretty self-explanatory. This is the part of the anime where we get introduced to all the girls that eventually end up living with Tenchi, or being close enough to where it doesn't really matter. It's all pretty standard in the way of introductions go for the cast, with some episodes towards the end of the arc being there to fill out and develop the relationships a bit more. The biggest highlight for this first bit for me is mostly Kiyone, Mihoshi's partner from the Galaxy Police, and probably by far my most favorite character in the entire franchise. The Multiverse arc is actually only 3 episodes, but being based on the audio drama CD and having the episodes themselves actually being connected to the point where Azaka, Kamadake, and Ryo-oki introduce and close out each one connects it in a way like nothing else. If I'm honest, most of this is really just filler. It's really there to show Tenchi and the rest of the cast in interesting situations, such as that magical girl Pretty Sammy bit I mentioned in the last episode, as well as at least one universe where Tenchi actually marries one of the girls of the series. Mihoshi of all characters. Considering that the story of this arc was the cast messing with a device of washus that could create alternate realities based on their fantasies, I'm still trying to figure out whose fantasy it was for Mihoshi to be the one that hooked up with Tenchi. The final arc, the Jirai arc, ends up with Ayaka's family being overthrown by someone claiming to be Yosho, who is also in line for the throne, while branding her and Sasami as traitors that need to be captured. This ends up with the entire cast being labeled as criminals as they try to make their way to Jirai to find out what's going on and how to put a stop to it. This is where most of the actual plot takes place, but even then there's a number of filler episodes that don't really go anywhere, as we get episodes like the gang running into a ghost ship, or having to go into a bikini contest for money. It's really only those last 5 episodes that really push things forward into the finale. This is what I meant by a loose story earlier, since the thing that I actually remembered most about the series, which is the characters trying to fight off against the new ruler of Jirai, is actually a very small part of the overall anime. And then there's the characters themselves, and this is where something clicked with me after watching things blow up in this series for the umpteenth time. You see, the change in characters I mentioned earlier isn't just to their histories, but their actual personalities as well. And nobody's personality changes more than Mihoshi's. In the original series, Mihoshi was a fairly ditzy character that made mistakes and was known for causing collateral damage. Despite this, she was still shown as capable of doing her job and dedicated to the idea of being a member of the Galaxy Police. In this series, however, Mihoshi is a lazy, airheaded blonde who is the source of the vast majority of problems caused in the anime. The personal breaking point for me was when everyone is trying to get through a space checkpoint without being discovered, and they would have been able to do it had it not been for Mihoshi being stupid enough to keep her firearm and her ID for the Galaxy Police on her body. And I hated the character for it. But it was as this was happening again and again that I realized Tenchi isn't the only anime to do this. Hell, it's not even something that's just limited to anime. There is a lot of comedy, as a whole, that ends up having characters who have a major trait that's just there to be used as a joke, and some get so large that they actually warp the story of the show themselves. Think of things like Ryoga's lack of direction in Ramna 1/2, Brock hitting on a girl in Pokemon, or Miko's thrill-seeking from Transformers Prime. All of these are character aspects that get to the point where they overwhelm the actual story being told, to the point where it stops being funny and it actually becomes irritating. I don't think I would have understood this being something that I didn't like about comedy as a whole if it wasn't for the rewatch of Tenchi Universe. Tell me though, am I alone in that respect of hating these little character traits that can ruin otherwise engaging elements of the story? Or am I simply making too much of a big deal out of it? I'm literally curious about everyone's thoughts on this one. I have to say that it's honestly a little weird to see this series again after all of these years, as the last time I really watched Tenchi Universe was back when it was airing on Toonami. It's a lot more goofy and off the wall than I remembered, with the actual story elements that I thought were more of a core aspect to the entire thing being more of just an ending plotline. Overall, I'd say if you were wanting a slightly more down-to-earth version of Tenchi that focuses a bit more on humor and the characters just living on Earth, I'd suggest checking it out. It's definitely better than trying to explain, or understand for that matter, the entire chaos that can be the full story of the OVA. That gets wild in a hurry. We'll probably come and visit Tenchi again in the future, though it might be a little while. I'm always open to revisiting older franchises that I've talked about on Fascinating Fiction, but I mainly wanted to do Tenchi so soon after the initial video because of how overwhelmingly popular it became. Next week, we're going to be talking about a franchise that's kind of fallen on hard times, and one that I wanted to talk about the aspect of it that I've missed the most. Oh, and before anybody points it out, yes, we are actually going to be getting a new video next week. You can blame my COVID shot for the lack of one for the last two. Sorry.